Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dependent on where you're calling from or tuning in this morning. Today, we'll be discussing how cities, utilities, and community stakeholders can collaborate to scale right of way charging. We're having a discussion on plugging into the curb, right of way charging innovations and strategies. Before we start the conversation today, my name is Simbiat Yusuf Mahler. I am the events manager at Ford. We have a special guest for you all today, our Ford's policy director, Jeanette Shore, who is going to give us a quick post federal election recap before we start. So, Jeanette, can you join me on stage?
Thank you so much, Symbiot. As Symbiot mentioned, my name is Jeanette Shaw. I'm the Director of Policy here at Fourth. As most of you know, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance will be sworn in as President and Vice President on January 20th, 2025. In the U.S. Senate, the Republicans are now in the majority with 53 Republicans and 47 Democrats. In the House of U.S. Representatives, there are still 16 races to call. Currently, there are 214 Republicans and 205 Democrats. The Republicans need 4 additional seats to take control of the U.S. House of Representatives. And we still have so much more equitable transportation electrification work ahead of us. We need to continue to educate Americans about electric mobility. We need to make sure investments are spent wisely. And we need to ensure those investments are seen as economic investments in jobs, infrastructure, manufacturing that are vital to U.S. global competitiveness, energy independence, and natural disaster resiliency. Let us all continue to build our alliances and work together within coalitions to ensure that we accelerate equitable transportation electrification and ensure that the United States and no community will be left behind. Lastly, we have 2 webinars that are coming up. One is going to be on electric vehicle adoption leadership on November 20th. And then our last and final webinar of 2024 will be held on December 17th, which is Ford's annual year-end review and outlook for transportation electrification. So please mark your calendars now for December 17th. And with that, back to you, Symbiot.
Thank you so much, Jeanette, for just giving us that quick recap. We're all in this together, and we will continue doing the work that we are doing. And now, before the panel starts again, I have a few announcements from the Ford team. Our moderator today is going to be our program manager, Avery Morris, who will be joining us later. Attendees, we ask that you please submit your questions through the attendee chat. I already see a lot happening there, folks introducing one another. We're so great to have you all here today. We will also be sharing the webinar slides, recording, and additional information with you all later on today after the webinar. So if you miss anything or you want to recapture something that a speaker said, don't worry, you will have all of the recap information after the webinar. And for some of you that might be new to Fourth, who are we? Fourth is on a mission to electrify transportation. We bring people together by creating solutions to create solutions that reduce pollution and barriers. Our work is done in 5 focus areas, which are access to electric cars, access to emerging modes, events and partnerships, policy advocacy, you just heard from our director of policy, and access to charging. If you would like to learn more about Fourth, the work we do, and just more about who works at Fourth, you can find that information on our website at fourthmobility.org. And we just want to take this opportunity again to thank our members and sponsors. If you're interested in learning more how you can be a part of the Fourth membership pool, or you're just like, I've been thinking about joining Fourth, it's not too late. Please feel free to contact our membership and partnership manager, Rachel Haverkamp. Email is on the screen, but we will make sure to send that information if you have any questions about what we do at Fourth and our membership and sponsorship opportunities. And one quick note, we have officially launched the Fourth Mobility Fund donation portal. If you have found value in the webinars that we've hosted like this, or any of the things we've done at 4th, we ask that you consider making an end of year donation to support our work. Your gift helps us continue offering free resources, hosting conversations, thought leadership, bringing people together, driving accessibility, clean and moving the clean transportation industry forward. With your support, we can keep bringing these valuable sessions or webinars to you and expand our impact in 2025. You can see the QR code on your screen, and we will drop a link in the chat. And with that, I ask Avery, please join me on stage and introduce our speakers so we can get the conversation started.
Thank you, Simbi. I'm excited to be here with you, with everyone, and with our excellent panelists. The way this webinar is going to work today is I'm mostly going to do my best to stay out of the way to let the panelists get into the heart of what we're here to discuss, right-of-way charging. All three panelists are going to speak about their work, then we'll open up the floor for some questions. Please chime into the chat with any questions you have that come up during the presentation, and we will have a Q&A at the end. So a little bit about me. I'm a program manager with Forth. I am based in Portland, and I've been with Forth for just about a year. I am excited to be here, and I love doing all of our work. I lead micromobility programming and our engagement with the public sector. Just give me 1 second. I lost our bios for the panelists. There we go. Okay, back to our panelists. I'm going to give a brief introduction for each panelist, and then we'll get into an icebreaker. Then we will hear presentations from each of our wonderful panelists. Speakers, please turn on your webcam so we can see you while I do these introductions. Thank you. Okay, first up is Hannah Morrison, a city planner on the Mobility Innovations team at the City of Portland's Bureau of Transportation. In addition to leading policy development and implementation of citywide EV charging projects, Hannah coordinates transportation electrification projects citywide and engages key stakeholders to advise on projects, pursue opportunities for collaboration, and ensure regional alignment. David Mason is the Chief Operating Officer at BT2 Energy. In his role, David leads the company's EV charging operations division, driving the expansion of EV charging infrastructure through strategic partnerships and key initiatives. Then Aditi Desai is the Director of Partnerships at Voltpost. In her role, Aditi spearheads strategic partnerships across the public and private sector to deploy convenient, accessible, and reliable retrofit lamppost EV charging. She has supported first of its kind Voltpost lamppost charging projects in New York City and Detroit, alongside establishing partnerships with corporations such as AT&T. Thank you all. Now we will move into our quick icebreaker to get the conversation started. So my question to the panelists and to everyone attending the webinar today is, what is the coolest or most exciting place you've seen a right-of-way charger sited? I'm going to ask Hannah to answer first, but I also just encourage everyone to answer in the chat. So Hannah, take it away.
Thanks, Avery, and thanks everyone for being here today. I think my answer has to be, since I'm city planner for Portland, we have what we think is the first DC fast charging pod in the public right-of-way. It was installed in 2011 in downtown Portland. And if you ever get the chance to visit, there's this giant fast charging pod and some level 2 in the right-of-way with Mount Hood behind it, the Willamette River, a fountain. Is just kind of everything beautiful about Portland.
That's awesome. Thanks, Hannah. I think that the visual is really exciting. Like, imagining charging there is really special. Aditi, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. As you can imagine, I'm partial to saying that one of the coolest places I've seen a charger sited is on a lamppost. I think, you know, Voltpost isn't the only company doing lamppost charging, but being able to leverage and retrofit existing infrastructure is a very creative use um, of of just available space.
Absolutely. It's really charming to have those two things kind of co-located and so connected. Lampposts are very iconic, so I appreciate that. David, why don't you go next?
Yeah, thank you, Avery. To be partial on my side as well, one of the coolest that we've seen, one of the first that we actually installed in the city of Boston is in Charlestown. It's right next to a brand new playground, right on the water, in a beautiful area, and great access to all those facilities. So it's a pretty cool view if you ever get a chance to visit.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's EV charging complementing all the other things that we come to do in a city. Thank you, and please feel free keep saying things in the chat if you have a story about charging or a memorable experience. We'd love to hear it. Um, I'm going to quickly set the stage for our topic today. So panelists, you can turn your webcams off. I'll invite you back when it's time for you to present or answer questions. But just a brief note about right-of-way charging and kind of Forth's role in it. So as we continue to see the EV market grow, the need for supportive charging network is greater than ever. We know that by 2030, about 18.7 million passenger EVs will be on the US roads, and they're going to require an estimated 9.6 million charging stations to power up. We really see right-of-way charging as vital to meet this demand, and the role of cities and the private industry, the role of everyone to create a nationwide network leading the charge. There are ambitious programs underway in Los Angeles, in Portland, in New York City, in Seattle, and other places where cities are testing innovative technology, innovative planning. They're putting publicly accessible chargers near libraries, near beaches, on light posts, on utility poles, and integrating them into our urban framework. Right-of-way charging is key also in that it increases access for a huge amount of city dwellers, for people who live in apartments and other multifamily housing, for people without private garages, for renters, and especially also for gig and delivery drivers. Right-of-way and publicly accessible charging creates equal access to electric vehicle ownership. Force supports this push with several strategies. We want to help meet the need for public chargers. So we have efforts to make public fast charging more affordable and more accessible. We are providing technical assistance and recognition to cities with charging programs and policies through a national Charge Smart program. And we're also working directly with the city of Portland on an exciting program that Hannah will share about a little bit later. I'm really excited to hear from our panelists about this important topic, and I think that we're all in for a treat to hear about strategies and the technology that cities are going to use to create this national public charging network. I'd like to invite Aditi to join us first and turn back on your webcam. Remember to everyone to put any questions that come up during her presentation or in the next presentations in the chat, and we will open up for Q&A at the end. So thank you so much, Aditi. Take it away.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's great to see such a nice turnout for this webinar. My name is Aditi Desai. I'm the Director of Partnerships at Voltpost. Our mission is to decarbonize mobility by democratizing electric vehicle charging access, and we plan on doing that by making charging as ubiquitous as lampposts. So the problem that we're trying to solve here, I'm sure a lot of us are very well aware of, and it's the case that the top EV adoption barrier for drivers is a lack of publicly accessible, convenient, and reliable charging. With just 1 to 2% of cars on the road today that are electric, that number is increasing year over year, with 9% of new car sales being EVs in 2023. There are also very ambitious climate targets set on both the state and federal level, really pushing the drive towards EVs. Yet there's an especially unique challenge for folks who are living in cities or areas with a high concentration of multi-unit dwellings, which is that drivers don't have charging at home. I love showing this picture here on the left of somebody charging from the second floor of their Brooklyn brownstone, which is actually a sight you see a bit more common than you would expect, but it really illustrates the fact that charging is scarce and inconvenient. And so at Voltpost, we're building the best solution to meet those drivers' needs. At Voltpost, we're retrofitting lampposts into a modular electric vehicle charging platform. These chargers are level 2, and by retrofitting the existing infrastructure, we're able to cut down on the cost, timing, and footprint of charger installation. Leveraging the existing infrastructure allows us to avoid the costly and timely construction and trenching that's typically associated with other standalone charging projects. Our platform is uniquely modular and upgradable, which allows us to future-proof the product over time and maximizes the charger uptime while keeping maintenance and operating expenses as low as possible. The charger has LED feedback, an integrated cable management system, and uses a utility-certified meter. On the software side, we have a custom mobile application where you can surface Voltposts on a map, manage the end-to-end charging session, do payments, etc. We're also pursuing an open charging distribution strategy so that you can surface Voltposts on partner apps and maps like Apple Maps, Google Maps, CarPlay, etc. And on the back end, we have a dashboard where you can track charging utilization data, insights, and other sorts of data. Ultimately, we're really building out Voltpost as a platform where we can license smart city services to cities and companies. So the charging infrastructure that we're building right now is focused on the charging hardware, the software, the data, and the O&M. But our modularity, as I mentioned, allows us to future-proof and upgrade the product over time. So that allows us to integrate other smart city services. So think of things like 5G and Wi-Fi for connectivity. For example, we just announced a partnership with AT&T where we'll be leveraging their IoT connectivity to deploy our chargers throughout Michigan. Think about including things like sensors for air quality, curb management, grid resiliency, thinking about how a distributed network of chargers can ultimately serve as distributed energy resources in the case of a grid outage, screens for media, and for more. We're currently gearing up to deploy a pipeline of over 100 chargers across the country to both public and private customers in New York, Illinois, Michigan, California, Connecticut, and more. We did a couple of pilot projects in these last few years with the New York City Department of Transportation, as well as the state of Michigan, and we're gearing up to deploy our product across the markets that I just mentioned. The company was founded in 2021. We're headquartered in New York with the team split between New York and San Francisco. We're venture backed. We've raised about $8.6 million in private investment. The founding team is former Samsung and Barclays, has extensive experience in bringing products from concept to commercialization. Some of our investors include RWE, which is the largest German utility, as well as Exelon, which is the largest utility here in the US. We have a scalable business model to deploy charging across the country. Our preferred model is hardware as a service, where we bundle the hardware, the software, the data, and the O&M for a turnkey licensing fee that the customer pays. Electricity revenue can be shared by the utility and the municipality. And under this model, we're able to apply different sorts of grants and incentives to offset the cost of the leasing fee for our customers. Ultimately, we're building out Voltpost as a mission-driven company. Our network aligns with the goals of reducing carbon by increasing public charging access, building stronger communities by putting these chargers up where folks need them. And we're especially excited about the opportunity to lean into green workforce development by working with local deployment partners in all of our markets. And that's a little bit about us. Happy to answer any questions during the Q&A, and please reach out if you're interested in learning a bit about Voltpost. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So interesting, and I'm excited to bring Aditi and all this about Voltpost into our discussion later with the other panelists. Next, I will pass to David.
All right, thank you, Avery. My name is David Mason. I'm with Better Together Brain Trust, also known as BT2. We're an electrification installer in the New England area. And for this case, I'm going to be focusing on our installations in the city of Boston, and kind of how we're tackling right away EV adoption and charging. And we're focusing on curbside EV charging in that area. So some of the key benefits that we focus on to help Alleviate is just expands public access and then underserved areas in New England area. The focus is really on we call them environmental justice communities. We actually have a map where you break out minority, low income, English isolation, and those areas are traditionally underserved. So kind of focusing on curbside charging and designing EV charging in those areas can help break those barriers a little bit more, and expand the public access in those areas. So what I'll talk about a little bit is just focus on some potential barriers, stakeholders, installation, and utility rebate opportunities. So some of the barriers that we run into when talking about curbside charging, high upfront costs. Typically, when you're working in more urban environments, your upfront costs for these installations are get pretty significant. You're doing a little bit more trenching work, more sidewalk repair. Equipment may be a little bit more expensive, and then also looking at additional areas like utility feeders. You got to work a lot with utility. That kind of goes into grid capacity. You're going to want to talk to your utility early, talk through any grid capacity errors that you can work through. Permitting delays, there's usually a little bit more permitting processes than your typical asphalt parking lot. It could include sidewalk permitting, electrical permitting, and just your excavation permitting. And then procurement of the equipment. So I have a picture here of a cabinet that's typically used. It's a great size, fits right on the sidewalk. It's an all-in-one, has a disconnect meter panel in it, and a meter included with it. But it could be a barrier on procuring that type of equipment. Last year, these used to take up to 36 weeks to get. Now there's more out there coming out into supply. So we've gotten those down to 12 to 15, but definitely something that you have to consider. So to kind of tackle some of those barriers, you have to start with your stakeholders. So really engage your local government, municipalities. You're going to want to talk to them often and early about permitting. And then coordinate with your building department to make sure you're getting the right permits. If there's street occupancy permits, you're going to want to talk to them and actually see how you need to fill out those permits. Your utility provider, like I said earlier, that power assessment, you're going to want to make sure that you have the right utility feed and the power available, whether it be transformers in the area or utility lines are set up correctly for your make ready. And then also utilities, I'll talk a little bit later. There's a lot of utility rebates and incentives that they can provide, and that goes with that assessment. And then community engagement. You're going to want to keep the community engaged the entire process, and including the installation process. So what we typically do for that community engagement during the install, we put up sandwich boards, lots of signage. We have a cool URL code that the city of Boston put together that points right directly to the website and talks a little bit about the curbside charging. So when folks pass by, they can actually read and learn about them. All right, to start off, you just got to start with your site survey and preparation for the installation. Really focus on any type of ADA compliance. You want access for all. If there's accessible areas in the curbside, and then it's really just your pathway from the main utility source to that charger. So if that pathway seems pretty distant, or if what is going underground on the utility side, if there's natural gas lines, main electrical lines in the way, you might want to change paths and figure out the best path to that EV charger. And then just high level conversations going back to working with your utility or your municipality is just talk to them about how they're going to remove snow, if there's tree roots involved, sidewalk maintenance, if they want the sidewalks to be, repaired back to how they were. You're going to want to capture all that up front during this site survey and prep. All right, and then make ready installation. So this is really the installation of the chargers. We bucket these into three different areas. Utility side service, it's your utility service to your utility transformer, and then we go from meter to panel, which we call customer side, and then all the way to your EV charger. So these areas are usually bucketed into different incentive fields as well. The utilities in New England will incentivize separately. Typically for the EV chargers, we also include bolt down, which I'll talk about a little bit more. Those aren't incentivized with the make ready, but it's a whole nother piece that you should be considering when you're going through them. And just some considerations going back to grid capacity, that's just a big one. Bring in the utility, have them, really bring out their engineering design team to make sure your service is available there. All right, and then kind of going back to the bolt down piece. So with the city of Boston, we're working with a lot of partners in the installation phase, and one of the partners is Maverick, who does the actual installation of. They do great work for the trenching. They bring the line from the utility service to the cabinet, and all the way up to the chargers. And then as BT2, Better Together Brain Trust, we handle the procurement of the equipment and then also the assembly and bolt down of the chargers. So in that area, just have some pictures here of showing where the line is at the pad and then how we're assembling the charger on the right there. But just some other considerations during these installation phases, you're going to want to make sure you have OSHA safety certifications, maybe National Fire Protection safety certifications, and then just knowledge of your install of the cord and cable management systems. If you're working with different manufacturers, they're different for each one. So just kind of making sure your team is well trained in that area. All right, and then going with that is software and commissioning and testing. So over here, we just have a cool picture. After we're done with installing the chargers, we actually test them. You can test them with your car, or with this cool tester you can have plug right in there. But it gives you a general idea if the chargers are working. For these chargers, we actually installed 80 amp chargers, and with the tester, we were able to kind of check that voltage and that amperage to make sure they're working. A lot of the onboarding and training can happen over YouTube sessions now, but definitely check with your manufacturer to see what type of training they offer to make sure you're up to speed on that charger. All right, and then just high recommendation. Make sure you have certain service and maintenance included. Usually, curbside chargers are public use, so high visibility is usually taken into account. So you want to make sure if there's a service plan, a parts and labor warranty plan, you can include that as well. All right, and then just to round it off, utility funding. There's a ton of utility funding out there. Going back to the make ready slide, you have your utility side funding in New England. A lot of times the utilities will cover 100%. And then for your make ready funding, they cover per port installation. So plenty of funding out there to search. Definitely add that on while you're going through your installation design. And then just to recap, you just want to make sure to just uh, go back and engage your stakeholders early and often. It helps with your permitting, helps with your getting everything in line, and then at the end of the day, apply for the rebates and get everything started. So thank you very much. I will be happy to answer your questions during Q&A. I appreciate it.
Thank you, David, and thanks to everyone for being really active in the chat. We will be addressing these at the end. So next up is Hannah Morrison. Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, Avery. All right, let me just get to my slides here. All right. So today I'll be talking about EV charging in the public right-of-way from kind of the policy perspective. And before I kind of dive into that, I actually wanted to take a step back. I'm sure many of you are familiar with kind of the need for transportation decarbonization and the role electrification can play on that, but just wanted to set the stage a little bit. So in Portland specifically, our transportation emissions are actually up 2% since 1990. So we're really off track and need to change trajectory fast. And we do have kind of several ways that we're trying to pursue transportation decarbonization. So in the middle here, you'll see our triangle. It's our Designing for Transportation and Climate Justice. We have a three-part strategy that revolves around reducing the miles driven through policy, pricing, policy regulations, planning and building more connected communities to make it easier for folks to get around without driving a car. But we know that even while pursuing those two aspects, we also will have some vehicles that remain on the road. So this kind of third piece, clean fuels and vehicles, really electrifying the miles that remain is very important. And then we've really woven this into several policies and plans citywide, from our transportation system plan and our strategic plan to our climate emergency work plan, and then our electric vehicle strategy. So I apologize, I'm recovering from bronchitis, so my voice is a little iffy. So we have a toolbox of transportation electrification solutions. It's not just about right-of-way charging. In fact, at PBOT, our perspective is really that charging should happen off-street if possible. We know a lot of people have access to home charging. A lot of people have access to workplace charging. There are private charging and private lots that can provide a lot of the need. But as you'll see later, we really felt like leveraging our asset in the right-of-way is a way to support folks that don't have access to home charging and might not otherwise be able to adopt an electric vehicle. And so that's one of the reasons we pursued right-of-way charging. We also have several other policies and programs in place. In the middle and the top here, you see our cord cover program that allows people to run a level 1 cord across the sidewalk, provided they use an ADA compliant cord cover. We have a EV make ready policy for new apartment buildings to ensure that the conduit is laid. And then we have several other forms of transportation that are being electrified. So it's not just about personal vehicles. Our local bus fleet is becoming electrified. We have an all-electric streetcar, and then we have an all-electric bike share program and e-scooter program. So electrification really encompasses a lot more than just personal vehicles. All right, and now to dive into right-of-way charging, what we're all here for. So as I kind of mentioned, we decided to pursue right-of-way charging for a few reasons. And one, in this map, as you'll see, access to public charging in Portland right now is not currently equitable. All of these polygons are what are called our designated centers. They're areas that were designated in our comprehensive plan where we expected to see growth and wanted to direct growth. So they're kind of our little main street neighborhoods around town. They tend to have the concentrations of multifamily zoning. So they're areas where we decided that folks would be least likely to be able to charge at home, and where we wanted to direct the public charging. So, the green centers here have over 5 public chargers, and then, all the way down to the red have 0 public chargers. So we really see the access to public charging kind of diminish as you go outside of the city center. And so we really wanted to support the growth of a citywide EV charging network with areas that lack the charging infrastructure right now. A lot of these areas on the outskirts of, as you move further away from downtown, are also likely to continue relying on personal vehicles because they don't have access to frequent transit or really robust bicycle infrastructure. So kind of the other modes of transportation that we'd really prefer people use aren't as accessible to these areas. And then, as I mentioned again, there are also areas with high concentration of renters who are unlikely to be able to charge at home, so might need that extra support from the city to adopt an EV. So when we were developing our public right-of-way charging framework, which the work for that started a few years ago, we made some core decisions up front. One of the first is that the city will not own, operate, or maintain any EV chargers in the public right-of-way. Should have been a little specific there. And that is because, we didn't inherently have core competency in that area, and we had a lot of utility and private sector interest in that area. So we decided that only our 2 local investor-owned utilities and private EVSE companies will be permitted to install chargers in the right-of-way, provided that they first obtain a franchise or a license for operating in the right-of-way and sign a master lease agreement. And then once those 2 pieces are taken care of up front, then the companies will be able to submit a site-specific permit for any site that they want to install, and it should be a relatively smooth process from there. And so the master lease agreement sets these kind of upfront requirements for equipment specifications, maintenance standards, data sharing, insurance indemnification, kind of a whole suite of things that we wanted to discuss upfront. And that's to make the permitting process as easy as possible on the back end. The master lease agreement, we also tried to future-proof as much as possible by setting kind of our goals for right-of-way charging rather than being prescriptive. For example, saying that the charger has to have a cord management system so that it's not a hazard to pedestrians, and the cord should be able to charge a vehicle in the right-of-way, instead of specifying the exact length of the cord or the exact type of cable management system. So currently right now, only pedestal or pole mounted level 2 charging is allowed. So no DC fast charging in the right of way, except for maybe special cases like that downtown Portland charging pod that I mentioned at the beginning. And then, the policy background to actually enable right-of-way charging, we updated our city code to create EV charging only parking spaces. And then we updated our administrative rules with location and siting criteria. The thought there is administrative rules are a little bit easier to update. They just require, director signature rather than going to city council. So if some of these location and siting criteria were to change, we would be able to be a little bit more nimble with it. So as I mentioned, EV chargers in the public right-of-way have to be within these designated centers, excluding Central City for now at least, since Central City has over a third of the public chargers and a lot more competing demand in the right-of-way. Chargers have to be on a local service street, so around the corner from a main street rather than on a main street. So we leave the main street to be prioritized for other transportation uses like a protected bicycle lane, maybe a bus-only lane, or even just closing the main street down for a street fair. It has to be in an area where parking is currently allowed. It can be in a metered or an unmetered district, and it can't conflict with any other transportation uses. So we worked very closely with our modal coordinators for all other transportation uses on this plan. We also have a suite of clearance requirements for health, life, and safety that I won't bore you with, but are in our administrative rules I'd be happy to share. We also wanted to design for accessibility by all Portlanders. So they should be located on blocks with ADA compliant curb ramps. We decided to stay aligned with the US Access Board current guidelines. So kind of incorporated that into our rules. And then parking requirements to ensure turnover and ensure that they are EV charging only. And they will be time limited during the day, but then unlimited overnight to allow residents to get a full charge. And that is kind of our EV charging in a nutshell. I'd be happy to dig into anything more in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you again to Aditi and to David for these super informative presentations. It's time for our Q&A, so I'd like to invite all of our panelists to turn on their cameras, and we will start out with a question. And thanks again for putting questions in the chat. We have been taking all of them and kind of doing a little condensation, so I hope that we will address everything that you folks have brought up. But my first question, I'm going to pose to David first and then invite our other panelists to answer, which is, what is one thing policymakers should consider before launching a right-of-way charging program?
Yeah, so I would, I guess, kind of going back to just consider timeline. So a lot of folks, when you first talk about it, you're thinking, I'm going to get an EV charger. It should take, 2-3 months to get going, but there's a lot that goes into it. Starting with your permitting process, and then also procurement of the equipment. A lot of delays can happen with just procuring the chargers, then also the all the installation equipment that needs to happen, especially if you're looking at things like the cabinet that I spoke of a little bit earlier. So just be wary of the timeline and the commitment there.
Absolutely. Aditi, I wonder if you would like to answer next with all that you know about really how those timelines work for installation and for kind of start to finish.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, transparently, one of the longest processes for deploying public charging is related to the permitting. And I think that, Voltpost offers a permitting light solution, but, recognizing kind of the urgency to get these chargers deployed, where we've seen some challenges is just moving that timeline along a bit more quickly and having the different agencies be a bit more nimble, right? I think that, the permitting process for deploying things in the public right of way are not the same. Each technology varies. And so public charging should follow a bit more of a nimble process, or, I think there just needs to be a bit more kind of fluidity with how these permits are awarded and granted, recognizing the fact that, this is for many cities their first time doing a wide scale, a widespread charging program. And with that comes the fact that, in the private sector, charging companies are looking to put these up as soon as possible, sitting on inventory, and, also can reconcile that with the fact that, the different agencies might have limited bandwidth, limited resources. But, I think where we've seen some of the biggest holdup is just in that kind of upfront procurement and permitting process.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. It's quite different than the private property deployments. Hannah, you were just, I mean, speaking a lot about permitting and timelines. You could speak about that, but is there anything else that you would advise other cities consider before launching a right-of-way program?
Definitely. Yeah, I think you heard a little bit of my spiel on permitting and timelines. I think I'd take a step back even further and say, the first thing that we did, and honestly had to keep doing, is just make sure you're talking to everyone. Bring all your stakeholders to the table. And I'm not just talking about the utilities, which are, a huge partner. They're one of our most important ones. But even internally, we held a technical advisory committee when we were beginning to think about right-of-way charging, and brought together our bicycle modal coordinator, our parking folks, our streetcar folks, and everyone you can think of, pedestrian ADA coordinator. And then through the process, realized we had to pull in even more folks. We worked really closely with our utility permitting people. We actually folded this into our utility permitting process rather than create a new permitting process, and tried to kind of make things as seamless as possible there. But as we got further down the process, realized we needed to talk to Treasury to see if we could fold this into parking payments. We needed to talk to urban forestry to think about street tree conflict and make sure that we could have both chargers and street trees. So there are so many stakeholders in this process that you have to kind of bring along in the journey with you.
Absolutely. It is a huge coordinated effort. I mean, to do anything in the right of way, and to work with, our large, wonderful public institutions. So I appreciate that. The next question kind of builds on that, thinking of partnerships. Aditi, I'll ask you to answer this first. How easy is it to integrate public EV charging into the existing electrical infrastructure network? So thinking about what utilities are already providing, what our other electrical infrastructure is providing. How easy is it? What do you have to think about?
Yeah, so I think really the first step in this is, pretty standard in terms of siting the chargers. So looking at a multitude of factors, including what the primary and secondary capacity looks like on the grid, as well as adding in other factors, right? Where is the EV uptake? Looking at disadvantaged community factors as well. And really using all of those different data points to identify where chargers should be placed. And so typically, we'll kind of provide a sense. We might have a couple ideas depending on the municipality that we're speaking to of where we think lamppost charging is best suited. We'll work closely with our customer to find those locations as well. And once that is figured out, basically, And I appreciate a lot of the questions that were being asked. Okay, how does Voltpost actually connect to the grid? And so what we're doing is we're leveraging the existing conduit in the lamppost. And typically there's a little bit of extra space in there where we'll pull through another handful of bundle of wires basically, and it'll power our level 2 charger. So, unlike, I'd say, Los Angeles is the only example of a city that has that full level 2 power that we're looking for. However, there are also other cities that might have it, but it's not common. And you'll see lamppost charging as being a bit more prevalent in Europe, just because some of that infrastructure is just set up for level 2 charging. But even though we're pulling additional power, it's very similar to doing an LED streetlight upgrade. The interconnection process is very similar to how the telecoms companies are installing 5G on poles. So this is a validated method. And so, we're not impacting the primary service. And ultimately, even doing that additional upgrade is still cheaper and quicker than tearing up ground to run new power lines.
Thank you. That's, just really great context and so interesting to think about leveraging what we already have um, to do this. Hannah, I wonder if you might chime in next. I know from knowing a little bit about your project that you had to do a lot of work to do kind of a survey of assessing where there were opportunities with the existing infrastructure. I wonder if you could share a little bit about how Portland approached that.
Yeah, definitely. So from the policy side, I mentioned we worked with a lot of our internal stakeholders to decide where to create our city location criteria. Right now, we have a Department of Energy grant that we're working with Forth on, and our two local utilities, Portland General Electric and Pacific Power. And so our initial kind of siting survey has been around that. And one of the things that we've had to do is work really closely with our utilities to understand for utility pole mounted charging, which is what this grant is for. How do we align utility requirements and feasibility of poles with our city requirements? And it's definitely been kind of a back and forth on where can we bend a little bit on some city requirements. Maybe could the utility upgrade some of their poles sooner to make them feasible for pole mounted charging? And then I think on top of that, we're trying to also understand community interest. So we will be launching an online GIS based map survey soon, where community members can go in and indicate where in the city they're interested in seeing charging. And we're really excited to also get that input from community and learn, also, I feel like it's kind of our first gut test of did we select the right location citywide? Is the demand there? Is the demand other places? This is our first iteration of EV charging policy, but this is an area where the demand is changing so quickly, the technology is changing so quickly that it is an area where we kind of expect to iterate and grow.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that community input combined with doing your hardware survey is like so key. David, did you want to add anything to this question?
Yeah, I guess I just want to add a little bit. It's design, design, design. So I know the city of Boston went through a lot of iterations. Going through multiple designs were sent from the make ready installer, and things changed a lot during those design areas. So definitely recommend involving, even if you can. You might start with a high level EV design. Going back to the city or municipality, but you're also going to want to bring in at some point definitely the utility engineering services, and possibly if you can bring in a third party partner that can do electrical engineering, civil work engineering. You're going to, on the install side, you're also going to work with your dig safe areas, and then in the permitting departments will be involved as well. So a lot of design will happen with this piece, and just be prepared for that.
Prepared for a big design team to do
Yeah,
a big design
exactly.
undertaking.
Exactly.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I'm going to turn to a question that got a lot of engagement in the chat. I think it's really important, which is about expanding right-of-way charging outside of an urban context. So we've seen the right-of-way concept piloted in large urban areas, but how does this model translate to rural or suburban contexts? Also, what are strategies, technology? How is deployment different between differently sized cities? David, I'll ask you to answer this one first, but then I think all of our panelists are going to have such interesting perspectives on this.
Yeah, I don't see it as being so much different. It just might be a little bit different with how the utility kind of tackles the service size and what type of service is needed. Typically, in a little bit rural areas, they might not have the feeders, power lines available for that type of feed. So, especially if you're sticking with kind of level two chargers, you want to make sure the voltage is ready. And a lot of times, rural areas in the city of Boston, a lot of it's underground trenching, a lot of it's underground wires bringing the voltage in. But in some areas, you might see that, oh, the power lines are actually going to be coming up overhead. So then you're changing your whole strategy there. You're still kind of working with the same strategy where you're talking to them about the utility transformers, what sizes they have, and what size you will need to kind of be prepared for that install. So as far as the installation goes, you're just kind of either working underground or above ground, changing it up that way, but not too much as far as the process for the installation phase.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I think that just having the access, right, to put the infrastructure in is huge. Aditi, I wonder if you might share next about if Voltpost has thought about expanding outside of urban centers, and what would that look like for you in suburban or rural contexts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so first, I think use cases really vary, and you don't want to think about charging as a one size fits all solution by any means. And that's kind of the beauty of having so many different charging providers out there to meet the different use cases and needs of folks. So, as an EVSE provider, we're of course thinking about charging in a holistic manner. And, while we've done projects in New York City and in like cities like New York City and Detroit, we've seen a lot of our traction come from deploying just outside of big cities as well, right? You have these kind of medium-sized towns that are also, quite nimble in terms of being able to get charging up. You see a lot of folks who are interested in deploying chargers. And so, you think about curbside as one use case for us, obviously, because there's lampposts on the curb, but it's the same for parking lots as well. Putting those up in parking lots at either universities or apartment buildings. A benefit of designing our product in a modular way is that we can also update the design depending on the community that we're deploying in. And so, just like we're seeing that there's a variety of different pool types across the country, we're modifying our product to meet those needs. I think that, really just, being at this stage of charging deployment allows us to, you know, kind of see the different types of solutions that our customers are looking for, which really vary for us. And so, just as I was encouraging, agencies to be nimble, we're kind of doing the same thing with our technology as well. So, seeing that there's a value in deploying these curbside, but also across like surface lots, parking garages, etc. It just kind of depends on what the sort of explicit needs of the communities we're deploying in are.
Absolutely. And that point about often it being easier in smaller communities to do something like this is so true. With, fewer people, sometimes it's easier, fewer levels. Hannah, if you want to share something, I'm super curious. I know, you're focused on Portland, but Portland has, many outlying communities that we interact closely with and that you work with. So yeah, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's all about need and opportunity. I think that I mentioned earlier that our perspective is really that charging should happen on private property first, and then right of way if it's needed. And so I think it's the same thing for smaller communities. We recognize the value of the right of way and all of the other things that happen there. The street trees, as I mentioned, protected bike lanes, bus lanes. So I think, weighing all of those different needs and demands of the right of way, but then also the opportunity. I think that we've seen that utility pole charging, lamppost charging, integrating into that existing infrastructure is way lower cost than and lower kind of time constraints and effort, everything than installing a pedestal charger in the right of way. So if there are those opportunities, I think that's where that it might be smart to pursue if there is that need.
Sure. Thank you so much. I have one last question. We have just a couple minutes left, so I'd like to end on this note, which was in the chat, and it's something that we actually were all discussing last week, which is about future proofing. How can we take this concept of right-of-way charging and future-proof it, think about ways to make it sustainable? Um, I'll ask Aditi to start. I know there was a question in the chat. We spoke about this, about how you future-proof the infrastructure, but I also would love us to talk about future-proofing the concept. So, Aditi.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think something that's exciting to see is the different policy mechanisms that are kind of, forcing this concept of future proofing by making sure that, certain parking lots and areas are EV ready for whenever it's the time to put up chargers. But I think on the technology side, as we all know, the technology is so rapidly evolving. And, I it would it'd be unfortunate to be putting up chargers that kind of have a one and done use, right? Where it's like, okay, as there's been a new development, you'll have to completely pull out the charger and kind of start the process all over again. That's a really huge capital expenditure that, frankly, most cities and most government is just not ready for. And so when we think about future proofing in the design, that's kind of the benefit of our modularity. It's being able to future proof and upgrade the over time and future proof and upgrade the product over time so that we can accommodate things like faster level 2 charging speeds, right? For example, we're doing 7.6 kilowatts, but there's faster level 2 charging speeds that are being explored as high as 19.2 kilowatts. And our design allows us, as we, sort of as the technology itself advances, being able to swap out modules and replace them with updated ones is really a benefit of our design. Also thinking about just the way that chargers can play a role in energy management over time. There's obviously a lot of interesting traction being done with DC fast charging and vehicle to grid, but thinking about the way level 2 chargers could even serve as distributed energy resources over time, right? For example, in the Voltpost, there's space in our modules for being able to put things like batteries, for example. So as our product is in our product roadmap, we're thinking about all of these different things, and that only can happen if you have a product that is just modular and able to be upgraded over time, and that still keeps that upfront capital expenditure as low as possible so that you can integrate all of these over time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Hannah, do you want to share next about future proofing? What are you thinking about at PIVA?
Yeah, I think we thought about this a lot as we were writing our policy, and I think there was actually a point where I went back and scrapped a lot of what we had written around being very prescriptive and saying, have to have a minimum of a 25-foot long cord that can reach every port, and being very specific about some of these equipment specs and other things, and really just decided to write our end goal for the charger. We realized that, there are new models like bring your own cord or lamppost charging. And this is such a rapidly evolving technology space that we really wanted to create a program where we could grow and not hinder ourselves long term. Another way we're doing this is through the master lease agreement. Only has a 5-year lease term. It can be extended for an additional 5 years, but that's relatively short for a big asset in a public right of way. But that's again because of the rapidly evolving technology. So there are a lot of ways that I did this that I could speak to more. I think those are some of the most important.
Thank you so much. And David, can you share about future proofing?
Yeah, so we think of future proofing kind of in two buckets. So there's one way you can do it was with the chargers. Uh, like you said earlier, the chargers. You can go with the latest and greatest chargers, but there's probably going to be another one tomorrow that can keep up. That's a little bit faster. So for example, City of Boston, we put in 80 amp chargers. Most cars cannot do the 19.2 kW. We've already gotten a lot of calls why they can't handle those type of speeds, but really that's just kind of a future proofing. Hopefully, eventually as cars develop, as EV cars develop, you're going to be able to utilize those speeds. The other way we think about it is just preparing the installation side for that future proof charging. So whether we need to add in multiple handholds so you're not pulling wire from long distances, whether you need to talk to utility about upgrading a transformer to make sure that it's sized appropriately for faster chargers, or even the cabinet size. Maybe you want to put in a larger cabinet to handle those higher amperage speeds and whatnot. So definitely areas you can add to it for the EV installation fees including wire size and all that. So there's a big topic on both areas, the charger and the installation, that can handle the future proofing.
Thank you so much. There's so much to do. Well, thanks to our panelists. That concludes our Q&A, and I'm going to pass back to Cynthia.
Thank you so much, Avery, for moderating the conversation. David, Aditi, and Hannah, thank you so much for joining us and speaking to right-of-way charging and the work you all are doing currently. I know we had a lot of questions that we did not get to. Aditi, Hannah, I see you've posted your emails in LinkedIn, but you have all of the presenters' information, email as well, on screen here. Our presenters will be CC'd in the email recap going out to you all. So we do suggest continuing the conversation offline. We always say an hour is not enough time to discuss and really dive into this. Maybe we need to look into 2-hour webinars or a half a day webinar so we can have a bigger dialogue. But if you would like to get connected and just hear more about the awesome work that's being done, I advise that you all please connect individually with our speakers today. Again, thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope that you can join us for our last webinar of 2024 as we wrap up the year and look forward into what 2025 has to offer. Thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you. Bye, all.
Thank you.